We're back now with a closer look at a region under siege. This weekend, we drove to the Turkish border with Syria, witnessing firsthand how violent extremism has put followers of different faiths in grave danger, and how this conflict is leaving a permanent scar on the land and on its people. We traveled hours to reach this border, a border like no other, where we passed those who fled Syria's upheaval, now without a home and with little hope. But finally, we see across the border the site of a rare victory against ISIS, Kobani, the Syrian border town where Kurdish fighters prevailed over the brutal extremists. Still, the destruction from the battle has left a devastating mark. It is easy to still see the destruction in Kobani. Almost every building in that town was struck during months of U.S. airstrikes. ISIS was kicked out of Kobani, but not before most of its inhabitants were displaced. Almost everyone from Kobani fled when ISIS moved in, but they won't be going back anytime soon. They're all in refugee camps. This one alone, 45,000 people. And now a new crisis is developing for the region's persecuted Christian minorities. Following the border east, some 100 miles from Kobani, we travel to this Turkish town. This is the town of Mardin. Here, up ancient stone corridors lay churches and mosques, a place where religions have coexisted for eons, where persecuted Christians are now finding sanctuary. Why target Christians? This man says they want everyone to be part of ISIS, all the world. So of course they wouldn't accept Christians in Syria. This week, ISIS militants abducted dozens of Assyrian Christians from a string of villages in northeast Syria. Some reports say as many as 350 Christians were kidnapped from their homes.
We might be helpless, but we are never hopeless.
Father Emmanuel Yukana is an archbishop of the Assyrian Church of the East who had been in touch with many of the fleeing families.
I feel crying for them. I feel myself being crucified with them. This is why we're asking, please, let us have an end to this continuous chapter of persecution, once and forever.
Long persecuted in the Middle East, the Assyrians are one of the oldest Christian communities in the world. They still speak a version of Aramaic, the language Jesus spoke. The abduction is only the latest shock in what has been a harrowing year for the region's minorities as ISIS swept through. Last August, 40,000 of Iraq's Yazidi population fled to Sinjar Mountain. U.S. airstrikes and humanitarian aid alleviated the situation until Kurdish fighters finally liberated the Yazidis in December. Then another blow. ISIS released a video showing the slaughter of 21 Egyptian Coptic Christians on a Libyan beach. This week, ISIS posted a video claiming to show the destruction of priceless Assyrian antiquities as well, thousands of years old, now ruined forever.
Indeed, it's the most difficult days we are passing now.
And as the threat to Christians in Syria grows, another Christian leader we spoke to left us with a simple request. On Sunday morning at Mass, remember to pray for us. We're now joined by Matt Bradley, who has covered this region for years for the Wall Street Journal. And Matt, you and I have been talking over the last year. Last time we met in Baghdad, we heard the Secretary of State's assessment about what's happening in the battle against ISIS. What have you been seeing?
Well, for the past several months, the administration has been flogging this idea that they are making some gains against Islamic State, and that the battlefield momentum that Islamic State first had when they took over Mosul and advanced to within shouting distance of Baghdad back in June, that they have reversed that tide. But there's really very little evidence to point to that. In fact, most of the gains made by anti-ISIS forces have been modest, and they've been problematic because they've been done by Shiite militia groups, by Kurdish Peshmerga, and other people who have vested interests in trying to gain land, in trying to subjugate Sunnis in the western part of the country. So a lot of the on-the-ground victories have really been either very small or somewhat mixed in terms of results and in terms of where this country is going. It's been more fragmenting.
So when you look at retaking Mosul, that they're saying is going to happen with those Iraqi forces, do you think that's possible in this year?
Well, the Pentagon has just sort of climbed down from their original statements, which said that this was going to be happening in April or May. That was always going to be an optimistic assessment. And that announcement really caused a lot of outrage, not just in Washington, but also in Baghdad, where a lot of these Iraqi military generals were saying, why are we announcing plans for this? Why are we telling the enemy when we're going to be attacking and how many soldiers we're going to be using? So this has been really difficult, for really vexing issue for a lot of people in Iraq and a lot of people in the government.
But the Iraqi security forces, from what you've seen, let's all remember, as we've talked about, they ran about a year ago.
And not much has really changed in terms of the Iraqi security forces' ability to fight against Islamic State. That's why when this assessment was announced, they said 25,000 soldiers, Iraqi soldiers, versus only 2,000 ISIS troops in the city of Mosul. And that's really hard urban warfare. That means that it's going to be street by street fighting, really a lot of losses. Now, it doesn't look like they're going to really be able to take the city within the time frame that they've announced.
And Syria, just quickly on Syria, that's another story.
Syria, there are no U.S. troops on the ground in Syria, so that's going to be very, very difficult. The United States has already pummeled the town of Kobani, which you visited, and it's been really hard to put U.S. People with U.S. interests on the ground trying to reverse the Islamic State's gains. Even the Kurdish Peshmerga in Syria, and even a lot of the other anti-ISIS rebels are not going to be, really projecting the goals that the United States wants to see in a new Syria. So it's very problematic.
Thanks. Always great to see you, Matt. Thanks for coming.